Welcome to Chapter 9. This chapter is on deafness and hearing loss. This is your instructor, Donna Shu. Let's take a look at the definitions of deafness. Now we can look at this in a medical perspective, as a continuum of hearing loss. For example, mild, moderate, severe, and profound. And I would like you to read about that medical perspective in your book. And you can learn also more about that in looking at the videos I provided for you on the Blackboard website. But also I would like you to look at it in regard to education under the IDEA law. So IDEA would say, hey, there's hearing loss that adversely affects your ability to learn, and we could look at it in two ways. Are you deaf, not able to hear with a hearing aid or any other adaptive device, or are you hard of hearing, which makes that you have such significant loss that it makes special adaptations necessary. Now, I do want you to say that the term hearing loss or hearing impaired, many deaf people do view that term as inappropriate because it suggests deficiency or pathology. Now, I would like you to learn about deaf culture. And I didn't know about this when I first started teaching, but I found it very fascinating, and I hope you do too. Many people that are deaf do not view hearing loss as a disability. They can do everything that you can do, they just can't hear. And they have a whole culture that really says, you know what, I am proud of who I am. Big D, if you see that I have that in quotes, big D deaf denotes deaf culture. And I found this, really interesting as I've met deaf people. Deaf people are very, very close in their community. If you think about it, they can communicate freely with someone else who is deaf, whereas in the hearing community it's very difficult unless someone knows ASL or, signing. So these are people that will travel a great distance, perhaps to go to a birthday party or to go bowling. Maybe they would drive a couple hundred miles to be with friends that they could communicate directly with. People who are in the deaf culture use touch quite a bit, and a hug, touching to say hello. They are very direct in their communication, no beating around the bush to say exactly what they think. In hearing culture, if you see someone who has a few gray hairs, you don't say, hey, you're getting old, but maybe in deaf culture you could say, wow, you got gray hair now, and not be considered rude. Deaf culture, deaf pride, they are very proud of their language, which is ASL, American Sign Language. That is their first language. I do want to speak a little bit about ASL. ASL is its own language. It has its own grammar, its own syntax, its own rules. It's a very beautiful language. It uses body language, facial expression. It is very direct, and to the point. It has its own rules, so it's considered a foreign language. So if you went to another college and took ASL, you would get foreign language credits, just like you would for Spanish. Also, ASL is American Sign Language. So if you go to Japan or if you go to Italy, their sign language is going to be different. I gave you some really good websites to look at how your ear sounds, also about ASL and about deaf culture, about the controversy over cochlear implants, and all of those kinds of big issues that supplement some of the things that are in our book. So I'd really like you to look at all of those websites in the Blackboard site. If you notice big D, that is deaf culture. Little d, if you look there on the last bullet point there, is used to describe a hearing loss. So if you have someone who's older, who lost their hearing later in life, like maybe your grandpa, you know what? They're not going to be big D. They're going to not associate with the deaf culture per se because they were hearing their whole life. And so, they're not going to maybe even learn any kind of signing or anything like that. So, I just wanted you to notice that there is a difference there. How we hear is very important. The word audition, that's the sense of hearing. We, don't always completely understand everything about the hearing process, but what we do know is sound then moves in through the ear canal, striking the eardrum here, and then goes into those three small bones of the inner ear, and then into the cochlea where the hair cells are, and that's where the sound is transmitted into energy and that goes into the brain, those electrical chemical signals going along the auditory nerve into the brain, and then we process the sound. Now, I'm not going to get into this in detail. I have a great video in the Blackboard site that will explain everything to you. There's also a nice picture in your textbook on page 314 that can help. The reason I like this is because hearing loss can occur in many areas. Like, for example, if the eardrum is damaged, you could have a different kind of hearing loss compared to if one of these bones here is calcified and not working. You might have a different kind of hearing loss. If there are cells that are damaged here in the cochlea, those hair cells, if they're damaged, you might have another kind of hearing loss. And if this auditory nerve, you could have everything beautifully working here, but if this nerve is damaged, like maybe through a brain tumor or a concussion or some kind of insult to the brain, a stroke, you might lose your hearing simply because this auditory nerve is damaged. So how do we adapt to our hearing? It's really going to depend on many, many things, like how much hearing loss did you have? Is it, a mild hearing loss, or is this profound? What, how old were you when this happened? Age of onset? Did it happen at birth? Were you born that way, or did it happen when you were 65? That's going to, your level of functioning will change. How do people deal with it? Like, did your parents get you services right away? Did you get that, first language of ASL if you were born deaf? Did you wait years and years before you got identified and didn't have a language? Did you have other disabilities going on also? Maybe you were a premature infant. You had cerebral palsy, you had, deafness, and perhaps you had a low vision. Well, that's going to impact your level of functioning. Now, most people that have a hearing loss may have difficulty with academic achievement. You're missing the information without the right help. Deafness doesn't mean intellectual disability by any means. Please get me straight on that. But what I'm saying is that there's a language barrier. If you did not have English as your first language, think about all the complexities of the English language. For example, the word pear, you could eat a pear, you have a pair of shoes, you can pear an apple. It's raining cats and dogs. Well, that's an idiom or a saying. That doesn't mean actually raining cats and dogs. So someone who literally understands those words doesn't understand the language, is not going to understand those concepts. So a person who is deaf may need a tutor. Even with an interpreter in the room, they're going to maybe need a tutor to explain what those words mean or put them in a context that are understandable. A reading level for an adult person that's deaf is from the 4th to the 6th grade. And that's not because of an intellectual disability, it's simply because it's a different language. ASL, American Sign Language, and English language are not the same. They are two different languages. Also, one's social functioning, it depends on ability and attitude of parents, attitude of others for inclusion, and some way to communicate in a mutually acceptable way. About 36 million people in this country have some degree of hearing loss, affecting males more than females, and most people with hearing loss are adults that are older, 65 or older. I thought this was interesting. About 40% of people who are deaf or hard of hearing have another disability. So what are some communication tips? And I've given you those also on a handout on Blackboard. Um, Keep your face visible to the person. Don't exaggerate your mouth movements. Face that individual. If you need to use sign language, make sure you have a qualified interpreter. Don't talk to the interpreter, speak directly to the person that's deaf. And remember that everything that you say will be interpreted. If you're writing a message to someone that's deaf, be very simple and direct. Use other things like such as a business card or a picture or a diagram. Gestures help a lot, facial expressions. And remember to use a written message. Do not avoid the person, please. Use a written message. It's better than nothing or no communication. It shows much more respect to write something down. The age of onset is absolutely critical to determine like what kind of education does that person need. And so we would look at, not only the type of need in the classroom, what kind of adaptive technologies, what kind of language needs. There are, many different causes, but most of the time we don't know, more than half of the cases. Maybe it's present at birth or congenital. Genetic factors contribute to about 50% of the causes. There's over 200 genetic types. Maybe your mother was exposed to German measles. Maybe you were born prematurely. So those are things that are congenital. But there are many things that are acquired after birth. Maybe you had recurrent ear infections, or maybe you've been exposed to some kind of bacterial or viral infection that caused hearing loss. Or maybe you worked in a really noisy factory, or you were exposed to loud noises at warfare or a concert, and that caused damage to the hair cells in the cochlea. What can help a person? Well, there are many different types of assistive technologies, and so we're going to go through a few things. Hearing aids make sounds louder but not necessarily better. Now we have more improved hearing aids that are programmable, so those are your digital hearing aids, very expensive and may not be covered by insurance. So if you're a human service student, you may be trying to get monies to help someone obtain a hearing aid. We also have assistive listening devices that could be linked between a teacher or a minister or a lecturer and the individual. So it would be a little radio receiver that the lecturer would wear, and then that information is transmitted directly to the person's hearing aid. We do have cochlear implants that is a technique that would then surgery that bypasses the damaged cochlea and stimulates the auditory nerve directly. There is an absolute tremendous controversy over these implants in the deaf community. I'm referring you to your textbook and also the website that I've given you online, because people that are deaf feel that they do not have a disability. Also, cochlear implants may be given very early. The child doesn't make a choice in getting that cochlear implant, and they may not want it later as an adult. It can cause headaches and other issues, so there have been people who just simply do not wear the cochlear implant. And by the way, when you have one of these, it doesn't mean you hear like you would without one. You have to learn how to actually interpret what those sounds are. So there's a lot of therapy that goes along with the cochlear implants. Other technologies and supports would include interpreters. So we have an interpreting program at NTC, and these interpreters are trained to help students in school settings. So they would interpret everything that's going on in the classroom. They may also provide tutoring. Just having an interpreter in the classroom is not going to guarantee student success, of course. The student has to work very hard to learn the material as well, but the interpreter gives a fair playing ground, if you will, so the student can have access to information and to communicate. There are speech-to-text translations, a computer device that will translate speech into text so that you could communicate with someone by text. Television captioning is very important, as you know. TTYs, or text telephones, are kind of going out as we are now getting into our cell phones and texting, and those things are very helpful. Also, video interpreting is very helpful. So you can call a relay service and the person can sign to the interpreter, and the interpreter can voice everything the person is signing. Alerting devices, such as if the doorbell rings, the lights flash. If the fire alarm goes off, those things can flash a bright light. Maybe you have a shake awake alarm clock, so it's a little vibrating shaker under your pillow or mattress. And even dogs are trained to be alerting if there's a doorbell ringing or somebody or something happening. They can hear that and then alert the person. Educational approaches will differ widely based on a person's philosophy. Some people have been trained to produce and understand speech, so that would be an oral approach. Some people have a total communication approach, so they simultaneously use speech and some kind of sign language manual communication. And then there's American Sign Language, as we said, is a legitimate language in its own right, with shapes and the location and intensity communicating meaning. And then bilingual and bicultural education. Majority of students that are deaf or hard of hearing go to public schools. And if you notice that, I've given you some statistics there. So you might be, in the regular classroom or maybe in a resource room for part of the day. About 4%, a small percentage there, attend special schools for the deaf. Now in Wisconsin, we have the school for the deaf at Delavan. And so everybody at that school, it's a residential school, uses ASL, the janitors, the crossing guards, the counselors, the teachers, the principal, everybody. Students live in the dormitory and then on the weekend go home. All the sports are fully inclusive, so wrestling, football, volleyball, drama, all extracurricular activities are totally using ASL. Many people say we need to have this level of continuum of placements available, remembering that one size does not fit all. So we need to look at what's best for the individual.